Thrive Heavy Lines the Crown is back, the unique kingdom builder with RTS combat where your decisions, benevolence or tyranny, impact everything from combat units through to city production. So join me as I explore the new 1.0 release of Thrive Heavy Lines the Crown, which you can check out using my handy little link down below. And it's currently on sale to celebrate its 1.0 release. Thank you to Zoogaloo Entertainment for giving me an early look at this build and for sponsoring this video. Let's get on with the show. A game of Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown begins by selecting a starting area with a little bit of customization along the way. Don't worry, we'll be able to capture more of these as we move through. Since I last played, the game now also has difficulty settings, and you can optionally choose to enable or disable the narrative events, and we'll talk more about those as the video progresses. In particular, I'm going to pay attention to the final act, but I'm getting just slightly ahead of myself here. Firstly, let's have a quick recap of the core, the foundations. We start by building a fairly humble kingdom, one type or two types of population on offer. The objective, the goal here, of course, is to get the necessary resources we need to start establishing a foundation. So, gather the resources nearby and begin to develop some more advanced supply chains, hooking each one up along the game's fantastic road network, which you will see change as we move through. Like any good kingdom, farmer houses will be the primary focus as we look to build up from the beginning of both the game's tome research-based system as well as the many types of population on offer, and these will vary a little bit depending on the way I choose to progress. The game's underlying theme, of course, will I choose benevolence or tyranny, and that will have a real lasting impact on everything from the kinds of units I can conscript right the way through to the decorations that I love to use to decorate my kingdom, as well as the kinds of population, the buildings that they'll live in, the buildings that they'll work in, and so much more. Let's jump through time, and take a look at what a slightly more advanced, a slightly more developed kingdom might look like, and focus in on some of those populations. One that's on offer, for example, here, absolutely working your way down the tyrannical line, and you'll understand why, are thralls. Here I'm constructing some really cramped houses for them, as well as some of the buildings that will fulfill their needs. Thralls are a particularly interesting one to me. Here you can see I'm confirming the selection after collecting some, as Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown puts it, after a successful fight, successful combat. And now they're wonderfully housed inside of a hovel. The fun, however, doesn't stop there, for the decisions that you make throughout the game, through the game's narrative events, through what you choose to unlock, so much more, will impact not just the fact that I can build the thralls, but also my military. Here you can see some of the units on offer down this kind of playthrough. My favorite one in particular, hot shout out to the Berserker. Nothing can stand in the way of the Berserker. Well, almost nothing anyway. The armory can also be used to create thralls, in this case creating them out of farmers. So it's not just combat that can fuel the thrall line. I've talked a couple of times about unlocks, about research, technology, progressing through the game. This is what the expertise tree looks like. And it will almost always give you 2, sometimes 3 options to choose from. Each one has a trade-off, so it's not just a linear tech tree. Here, for example, I can choose a bonus for my thrall hovels, though you'll notice that each one provides both a benefit and a drawback. Option number 1 gives me extra yield wherever my thralls are working, however they'll consume 100% more food. Option 2 gives me extra happiness, but building costs are increased. And I think that this helps not just make each game of Thrive a little different, but also really helps you feel the impact of your decisions. Good versus evil, benevolent versus tyrannical. Here you can see a quarry that I'm switching to large stone blocks, one of the options available from this particular building. And unfortunately for my thrall brethren, working conditions, questionable. On that note, step into the light with me as we take a look at the other side, the benevolent side. What if I chose not to be quite as tyrannical? instead leaning into a completely different class of population. Here you can see I'm setting up a little scholars outpost with scholarly residents and places for them to stay. Ultimately, the way that you progress through the game, benevolent or tyrannical, will depend on the choices that you make, and many of these are expressed by the game's narrative system. It's deep, it's detailed, as we discussed at the beginning of the video. It is also optional if you'd prefer more of a raw, streamlined RTS city building experience, then you can choose to turn all of this off. Doing so, I wouldn't recommend, at least not in your first few playthroughs. You can get a lot of goodness out of the rich, often diverse options inside of the storyline. Regardless of which path you choose, you are not alone in this world, and your populations, your people, your kingdom will face a variety of challenges, including invaders, so you'll need to have your defenses ready, else they'll just roll through and attempt to burn everything down. On top of that, there are challenges that your populations will present. Here I'm frantically trying to find, oh, here's a handy little space, to build an infirmary. Why? Well, because my people are sick. And this requires not just the building of an infirmary, but also I need to change my production. These fermenters swapping from producing the good stuff like cider and beer, maybe mead, instead producing flu cures. These cures will be distributed via the infirmary to provide health care to my people. I also thoroughly enjoy the now wider roster of decorative options, of customization options for my kingdom. Many of these that you see me placing here around the graveyard, one of the later buildings, perhaps fitting, considering we've just dealt with a plague, and I'm decorating it with some trees, some gardens. Maybe I'll throw a fountain down in future as well. These aren't just aesthetic, though I really do appreciate the aesthetic appeal. They also provide some real in-game benefits. The trees, for example, reduce pollution, perhaps improving the overall health of my people, while other buildings, constructions, cosmetic things may also provide influence or other yields. And the happy, growing population that I'm fostering also needs to expand, thanks to initially a trade route, and then really thriving on trade routes. You'll be able to connect new resources, different resources, and ultimately expand your kingdom across the game's map. There is one glaring purple enemy at the center, as well as some marauders, sort of these barbarian-like folk who may also trouble you. If you look to focus in the center, if you want to dominate the map, you will be up against some fierce opposition. Not only are their territories, at least the capital, the core territory, very well defended, but they will also look to attack you. For, as I've mentioned already, you are not alone, and defense is not something to be overlooked in Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown. But also you shouldn't overlook the small things, because while it is about developing resource chains, production chains, your manufacturing, it's also about meeting those needs of your populations, about keeping them happy and healthy, and you guessed it, thriving. Here I am again, just leaning into the aesthetic functions a little bit more. I love the attention to detail, and I'm not talking about mine, where I'm placing gardens or fountains or anything like that, but the attention to detail in how, for example, the road texture changes depending on, well, how you've played, the populations that you're building, the kind of kingdom that you're building. And the beauty of it, quite literally, whether you're building a more defensive, whether it be benevolent or tyrannical run, or maybe a slightly more aggressive kingdom, it doesn't matter. The visual overhauls are greatly appreciated. This was played and recorded in 4K, and that visual enhancement also extends to the textures of the grasses and the trees. A really nice improvement in this, the 1.0 full release build, since I last played the game around 6 months ago. Some other highlight improvements for me in this version are, firstly, the way that it plays, much smoother. Many bugs have been ironed out, including some that I passed on myself as feedback to the developers. So shout out to them for addressing the issues and producing what is, generally speaking, a very polished build for Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown in its full release. One thing that I've glossed over maybe a little bit, though it has been woven throughout this video, is the combat. Not just the many units that are on offer, but of course fundamentally the fact that it is a huge part of this game. You'll see it come up time and again throughout the video, and when you play Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown yourself, you will absolutely need to engage with it. At the very least, this will be defensive. And honestly, little jumbo tip, make sure that you build a few guard towers and at least train some of the more basic units. Their requirements will be relatively low in terms of resources, and you'll be able to fill up those guard towers with archers, so you don't have to go through what is now a familiar story of this video, quickly defending yourself, but then building a really beautiful cemetery, just to sort of cap off what may be an unfortunate event in the kingdom's history. Here I should also note that advancing through the game to get the more advanced supply chains, better weapons in your production queues will benefit you greatly. The champions, the longbowmen here that you're seeing, these advanced units, are so much better than the early ones, and you will find great satisfaction in pulling together an army just like I'm doing here and marching out to remove some marauding pests on your border. Of course, you're also vying for territory. Each territory, again, may have natural resources that are unique to it or a few others, so expansion is at least a little bit going to be necessary here, and you're going to want to do it as well. Clearing out these folk will make life just a little bit easier. Maybe you'll gather some thralls in the process if you're moving down the tyrannical path, but nonetheless it will help you grow out and expand. The most obvious way to do this, though, isn't by mopping up fights around the edges, but instead about identifying some enemy territory to go and grab. And my second little tidbit tip for the video, some of these may be relatively undefended. Strike on them while they're new, before they can get a foothold in territory, and once you stumble across where that foothold is, you'll find great success in taking them down. And while weak spots like this may be present across the entire map, you'll still need to have your wits about you. For one of the greatest things that I noticed about this, the 1.0 release for Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown, is its formidable AI. It absolutely will take advantage of a weak territory of mine. It will raid me, not so much that it becomes annoying, but enough that I do need to focus on combat, at the very least defense, or this will happen to me. Thank you very much for joining me at this look at the new, improved 1.0 version of Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown. I have another video on it, I'll link it down below if you'd like to hear a bit more maybe about the early game, the foundational parts, but nonetheless, thank you for being here. You can of course check out Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown using my link down in the description, as I've already mentioned. I'd encourage you to do so if you'd like to learn a bit more or play it yourself. Thank you for joining me, thank you for watching, I'll see you next time.